Hi, everybody. Welcome tonight to the Armchair Traveler series through the Haynesboro Library. Tonight's talk is all through Zoom. This is, I think, the 25th talk that we've done through the Haynes Library, and I'd like to thank the library for hosting this, and for Matt Gilson, who's the deputy director and does all the Zoom parts and the recording, and he puts it up on the website afterwards. So if you have some friends who missed tonight and they'd like to see it, or you want to see one that you've seen before, again, you can go to the Haynes Library website. You go to, I think, e-learning and then online programs, and then there's a list of all the past talks. So there's like 24 talks on there, and I welcome you to go look at those. So these talks started about, I think, the second year of the pandemic, when lots of us maybe could travel but weren't traveling. And it was a way for us to all get to see each other and hear about great places to go without actually having to get on a plane and risk COVID or whatever. But it's been very useful. Lots of us still maybe not going to some of these crazy places, and we might not want to climb up to the top of mountains or pack raft down rivers, but we still want to see the places. So it continues to be a place where we can see our friends and neighbors doing cool stuff around the world. Upcoming 2 weeks from now, on February 12th, is our next talk, and that's by Natalie Dawson and Evan Sargent, and it's Skinny Skis in the North. Doing skiing up in the Brooks Range. And then we have several other talks after that. However, the people giving them are still out traveling, and we haven't settled on exact titles or dates. So just keep watch for the flyers, and it's also advertised on the Haynes website. Okay, so I'll introduce Brian to you here in a minute. He's the one giving tonight's talk. But first, I want to tell you, after he talks, if you want to ask questions, you can push the little hand icon and then unmute yourself and turn on your video if you'd like and ask questions, and Brian can call on you, or if there's a break, you could just ask the question. You can also put questions in the chat, which is bottom down on the lower part, and if Brian sees that and it's a good time to answer the question, he might answer it during the talk, but otherwise we'll go through those at the end. And the copy of the talk should be on the website in a couple days, so watch out for that. Okay, so let me introduce Brian to you. Those of you who have been to these talks before have seen him before. He's been giving a talk for us each year. His previous talks were about pack rafting in the Stikine, crossing the Fortress of Bears on Admiralty Island. That's right, Admiralty Island. Yeah. And exploring Adak Island. That was a very popular one, with over 11,000 people watching the video online afterwards. So Brian lives in Juneau, which is why we're doing this via Zoom tonight and not in person at the library. He was born and raised in Juneau. He's an Alaskan explorer. He's an ROV pilot, amateur geologist, blacksmith, spelunker, and local historian. He co-founded the largest hiking group in Alaska, which is called Juneau's Hidden History, which has over 27,000 members in it. He's explored ghost towns, forgotten historic places, and over 1,000 abandoned mines in Western United States. After his adventures, he shares his stories, locations, and knowledge of the outdoors with others, making it so they can go see it themselves if they'd like. The Alaska Society of Daughters of the American Revolution honored him for his volunteer work in historical preservation. He co-authored a paper that was published by the National
Speleological Society.
Thank you. On the creation of glacier ice caves, and if you've ever seen his pictures in those ice caves, are pretty spectacular. He retired after 15 years of law enforcement, is now a part-time weather observer at the Juneau Airport. He's active in the capital city, leading public group hikes, volunteers in classrooms, teaches others about gold panning, pack rafting, and basic outdoor camping skills. And he was recently starred in one of the top 10 shows on Netflix a few years ago. So anyway, I will hand this over to Brian now, and we can ask questions and talk more afterwards. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to my shared view, shared screen, and we're going to start this PowerPoint. I am talking about Havasu Canyon. There we go. Can everybody see that, I hope? So I'm talking about Havasu Canyon in Arizona. I recently went there with 3 of my friends. It's on a native reservation, and you have to go through a lottery system to get tickets. They make you create an account online and book your reservations. But if you book in the off season, it's pretty open, and the off season tends to be the colder months. And being from Juneau, Alaska, I didn't want to see what triple digits in Arizona looked like. So I decided to book our tickets for November, which a lot of people told me would be too cold. You can't get in the water. The water tended to be about 70 degrees. The air temperature was right around that same temperature most of the time, too. At nighttime, it probably dipped into the 40s. But I want to give you guys an idea of where we're talking about here. I'm going to zoom out here. We're on Google Earth. Give you an idea real quick here. So looking at the map, we're going to be focusing on Peach Springs, this little town here in the middle. Hopefully you guys can see my pointer. We have Las Vegas up here in the upper left. There's 2 ways to fly in to this area. You could either fly into Vegas or you could fly into Phoenix. We flew into Phoenix because we had friends nearby and they came and picked us up. And the native reservation that does the campground at the time required you to check in the day before. My understanding is they don't do that anymore. You can check in the day of your reservation. But we had to check in the day before, so we drove over here to Peach Springs from Phoenix. So now that we know where we're talking about, I'm going to go back to pictures and Google Earth. Sorry. There we go. I lost us there for a minute. So if you can see Peach Springs, Arizona, we stayed at a hotel in Peach Springs when we drove in because we had to check in the day before for this adventure. And what they don't tell you when you book this reservation, that if you're going to stay nearby to get near the trailhead, you have to stay in one of 2 hotels. And there's one in Peach Springs, and then there's another just down the road at the Grand Canyon Caverns shown here. And the Grand Canyon Caverns Motel, I'm not going to lie, looks scary. So we decided to stay at the Peach Springs Hotel, which looked like a traditional hotel. Not a Hilton, but I mean, nice building, looked great. But what they don't tell you, and what we learned later, was there was a jar of earplugs sitting on the desk in the hotel when we booked in. And about every 20 minutes, a train rolls by. And so all night long, we heard the trains running down the train tracks directly behind the hotel. So something to think about when you're spending the night at one of these places. Both of them are on the train tracks. Bring some good earplugs and plan on not a good night's sleep. So to get into Havasu, we left Peach Springs. We have to go over to the Grand Canyon Caverns over here. And they have a check-in. You get some wristbands. You fill out a little bit of paperwork for your car. And then you drive back down the road, and you basically enter the native reservation on this one, well, it's not a 1-lane road, but this road that goes to nowhere, it feels like. You drive for about an hour, and we're going to drive through the desert. We're in the native reservation. We didn't see a single car until we got to a roadside check-in. And we get here, it's a long ways. We're going to get into the driving across the desert. There was pretty much nothing to see for quite a long time. And it takes us deeper and deeper into the desert. And then we got into some steeper stuff, a lot of winding roads. And all of a sudden, poof, you're on the edge of a canyon. And I'm going to show you in 3D view what this looks like. So the road hugs the edge of this drop-off. There is a helipad right here near the parking lot. So if you wanted to pay, you could pay $100 per person and fly to this campground that we stayed at. And $100 a person doesn't seem very much, but what they don't tell you is that the local natives get first dibs on the helicopter. So you might be first in line standing there, but then a group of 40 that live in the village show up, and now you're not flying out until 2 p.m. So you could end up standing there for 4 or 5 hours. There's a fairly large parking lot here. When we got there, every spot in the parking lot was full. The campground can hold a maximum of 300 people per day. So the whole parking lot was full. There were cars parked all along the road back here for almost a mile. I think our vehicle was somewhere back in here, almost a mile away when we finally found a place to park. And our friend Scott dropped us off here at the main parking lot. He parked down the road and then came hiking back, only to then hike 10 plus miles with us into the canyon. So he actually did extra work, and we probably should have thanked him more than we did. But you park, you show your wristbands, and then you start walking into this canyon. And the first, I don't know, mile drops you about 1,200 feet into the canyon. So you come out of the parking lot and you go down these zigzags. And while you're going down these zigzags, there's mule trains hauling gear in and out for people. So if you don't want to hike your gear in, you can actually pay to have a mule train hike your gear in. So other options to make the trip easier for you. With our group, we just threw our bags on and we're like, we're going to do the whole thing, carry all our own weight. We're not taking the helicopter. We're hiking in and out. So I want to show you how steep these zigzags are here before we switch over to photos. And it's pretty tight. I mean, the trail is maybe 8 feet wide. And there were several times where we were going down the zigzags and the mule train was either coming up or down, and you had to hug the hillside and the mules were squeezing past you as you were hugging the hill. So I am going to take us down the canyon. We go down the zigzags, down through this canyon. And the slot canyon basically gets tighter and tighter as we go. And you kind of just work your way down into the canyon. And all of a sudden you hit this grassy area. There's trees, there's flowing water. And Havasu Springs kind of comes out of the ground right here in this area. And we're coming out of this canyon here. And then we come down, we enter the village of Supai. I might be pronouncing wrong, but that's what everybody called it. The helicopter lands in the village, and then if you wanted to hike from the helicopter into the campground, it's another like 2 miles in. So you go through the village, and then you kind of hit the campground in here. And the campground is from kind of right in here. It's about a mile long of campground right alongside Havasu Creek. So now that I've kind of described what we're looking at here, I'm going to switch over to photos and kind of give you a closer view of where we went. I have to change my shared screen here. If I can do it. Go back to the slideshow. Can you guys see that now? I hope. Can everybody see that? Can we see the slideshow?
Fine.
Sweet.
That's good, Brian.
Okay. So this image I couldn't turn the right way, but the parking lot's up here. We have the zigzags down into the canyon. You work your way down through the canyon. I figure people will use this later if you're taking screenshots of the presentation, but a nice little map. It gives you the mileage and distance. So here we are going down the zigzags into the canyon. My friend Marita, my wife Marita, my friend Megan, and my friend Scott went with me. We had somewhere around 30 to 35 pounds worth of gear. We had to bring a little more because we knew the temperatures were going to dip in the evenings, and so we wanted to make sure we had enough layers to stay warm. Most of the people hiking in just had like day bags or water bladders on, and their gear was either being flown in and out with the helicopter or they were taking the mules in and out. And you can see zigzags just coming down this little valley, and then you enter just this beautiful giant valley, which is part of the Grand Canyon. When we started hiking, it was cold. I want to say it was probably 45, 50 degrees when we started, especially in the shade. But by midday, we were seeing 80s in the sun. And for Alaska, 80 for me is hot. So I figured part of this presentation is showing you where you could go during the cold months here in Southeast Alaska and go somewhere that kind of is very similar to what we see in the summertime as far as temperatures go. November, October seemed like a great time to go to Havasu. There's my wife, Marita. She's got her gear all on. We're using some ultralight bags that don't weigh very much. But, she's carrying probably 30 pounds worth of gear. A lot of zigzags down into the canyon, and then eventually we're going to end up over here. Coming down. This is probably the best view that we had the whole time. Helicopters are flying in and out. We have a helicopter in the upper right-hand corner. They seemed to fly most of the morning into about noon, and then we didn't see them until they were starting to pick up people in the afternoon. And they didn't fly directly over us. They kind of flew off to the side. It's kind of surreal because it seems like you're all alone, but there's helicopters, there's mules, there's things coming in and out. Right away, we started to get warm. You'll notice my buddy Scott here rolled up his pants. Started to get hot. We're going 10 miles to the village. They had recently had a washout, a big flood event about 2 months before our trip. A young lady died downstream. They had a heat event in September where there were triple digits, and I think it was a 40-year-old man hiking out died due to heat stroke. So, I mean, you definitely want to know your temperatures, carry enough water, sit in the shade if you get too hot, kind of thing. It feels like it's very safe, but there isn't a whole lot of checks and balances for rescue because you're on a native reservation. For example, like during the flood, my understanding is National Guard helicopter was not allowed to land and help rescue people for quite some time until they were able to clear that through the tribe that they were allowed to land. So hiking into the desert, we passed several mule trains. They have a set of rules where they don't want you to take pictures of the villagers, they don't want you to take pictures of the village, and they don't want you to take pictures of the mule trains. Now, being an Alaska explorer, I've been to some of the West Coast Alaska villages. I've seen sled dog teams. I'm kind of used to working animals. A lot of people would look at these mules and say they're starved, they're injured, they're a work animal. I definitely probably wouldn't treat them the way I was seeing them treated, but I could totally see that they were a tool and not a pet. So something to keep in mind as you head down there. You are going to see some mules that aren't fat and round like you usually see in somebody's pet corral. Walking into the Slot Canyon, it got tighter and tighter as we went in. You could definitely see that water had rushed through here recently. Some of these large boulders had moved. The path that we were walking on was loosely packed. Rocks rolled under your feet. My friend Megan, we we didn't quite get to the trailhead. We were at Peach Springs, and we were going to go to check in, and we drove over to the Grand Canyon motel to check in, and she realized she had forgotten her hiking shoes right before this trip. And so we actually drove over to Kingman that night, and she bought a pair of brand new shoes to take on this hike. And she was the only one, I think, by the end of the hike that didn't have blisters. So you can do it on a new pair of shoes if you have to. We took probably 2 stops as we did the 10 miles. We stopped for lunch. We stopped for water. Just kind of take your bag off for a little bit. All along the trail, there's signs of man-made things, or, in this case, people stacked rocks on this little ledge. Looked like little pockets, so people would pick up a small rock and leave it in there. Apparently, this thing used to be totally covered, but after the storm, all the rocks washed away, and so people are restacking the rocks in the little pockets. Here's where we start to see water. We got a little pool of water down here below. Several sections of the trail, I'm not gonna lie, smelled like mule pee and mule poop. There's something like 50 mules that go in and out of this canyon daily. On one of the trips, we saw a mule train go past us, and I'm pretty sure every mule was carrying cases of Red Bull. I'm assuming the Red Bull was sold at the store in the village, but we didn't go to the store in the village, so I don't know for sure. But we're talking thousands of cans of Red Bull on these mules, and it was just being hiked in and out. As we rounded the corner, you get to where Havasu Creek starts to get to the village. I did notice as I was putting this slide together, I did take a picture of the mule train. It's just ahead of us here on the left. Hopefully nobody gets too mad at me. It's not a close up, but yeah, there's 5, 6 mules with somebody leading them. The mules look like they could lead themselves. They totally knew where they were going. It looks like a 4x4 road. There was a couple side-by-sides in the village, but they had to have been flown in by helicopter because there's no way to drive into this area. It's pretty remote. So there's the start of Havasu Creek. The spring's just another mile upstream. This bridge had almost washed out 2 months before. As we walked across the bridge, it flexed in a few places and definitely needed to be fixed. But entering the campground, there were picnic tables at almost every campground. It almost felt like a Forest Service type campground where you had a picnic table. Some campsites had a little fire pit. Havasu Creek is right behind us. You pitched your tent, you picked your spot. Nothing was designated. You kind of got to choose wherever you wanted to be. You'll see this little green tag on my tent that showed that we had paid for our reservation. And every once in a while, somebody would walk through the campground, and I assume they were looking for those things. But they could check our wristbands at any time, which nobody did. You can see kind of what we hiked in with. We both had ultralight tents. We tried to take as little gear as possible. We kind of wore the same clothes almost every day. But you're right next to a cliff. So something to keep in mind, you don't want to pitch your tent at the bottom of this cliff because you don't know if rocks are going to fall on you. There's a campsite in the background here on the left where we watched some people pitch a tent and they were directly beneath that cliff face. And I couldn't go to bed that night without walking over there and telling them, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. They didn't end up moving their tent. And during one of the nights, we had rocks fall off the cliff and pierce my friend's orange tent over here that I have photos of later. So something scary to happen at midnight. Everybody turned on their lights, started looking around. Everybody's okay. And the next morning, we find this razor sharp limestone that had sliced through their rain fly and went through their tent and missed Megan by about a foot. We had to put our food in dry bags, or some people used bear canisters. There are some crazy raccoons in the area. There's some big squirrels. If you left food out on your table overnight, things walked away. My buddy Scott found out the first night. He left his spoon on the picnic table, and the next morning there were little raccoon footprints in the dirt under the table, and his spoon was gone. So we kind of joked around that there was a raccoon basically running around with his spoon. We searched all over the campsite, could not find his spoon. So there's a raccoon playing around out there with a really nice brand new camping spoon. Everything we kind of just left off the ground. We rolled things up. Things dried overnight, even though the temps were cold. So like socks, shoes, that kind of thing was dry by morning, which was really nice. The water was right around 70 degrees. With the air temperature a little lower than that, you could get in the water, but then getting out of the water, you wanted to dry off real quick because you cooled down. Um, but several times, like I just laid there on the little beach and put my feet in the water, and it felt great, especially after long days of hiking. At one end of the campground, there's a waterfall, and at the other end, there's a waterfall. Um, this is Mooney Falls. Mooney Falls has, I think it's over 100 feet of drop, and you have to go down this really sketchy ladder and chains to get down to it. But at the top, there's this beautiful bench, and you can sit here at the top of the falls and enjoy the view. You could technically pitch a tent just to the right of our feet here. Several people had tents up on the far edges, and just a really beautiful place. But most people wouldn't make it to the bottom of Mooney Falls. This is us coming down to Mooney Falls. You'll see that there's a rock drill spikes pounded into the sandstone or limestone, and then the chain is just kind of wrapped around them, and you hold on to everything, and everything's wet and slimy. You'll see how tiny these people are below us. There's several ladders you have to climb down. And then there's even 2 cave sections of this climb down to the base of the waterfall where you actually go into the rock, you're underground, and then you pop out again. Most people stayed at the top of Mooney Falls, but if you could make it down to the bottom, it was definitely neat. Nobody in our group had trouble. We tend to climb a lot of mountains. We tend to do a lot of outdoorsy things. So as long as you had 3 points of contact, it was pretty good. But it was a little slick due to the water from the falls. Here we have, hopefully our chat box isn't in the way here. I'm going to move it over here just in case it is. On the right-hand side, you can see one of the people in the upper right-hand corner coming out of one of the caves. My friend Scott is in the red shirt. He's turned around backwards, holding onto the chains. Megan's right below him. And then my wife Marita is getting ready to hit this ladder that's almost completely eroded away from people rubbing their feet on it. So some of the rungs are actually very thin. Apparently that ladder's been there for a really long time, and they're not keen on replacing it just yet. But I could feel the rungs like flex under my weight, which was like 220 pounds. So I didn't trust some of the rungs like some of the other people did. But Mooney Falls, wonderful, beautiful waterfall. The view was spectacular. This is all part of Havasu Creek, so the temperature, like I said, is the water is 70 degrees. We did notice during November, much of the canyon did not get direct sunshine. So I could see somebody maybe wanting to go end of September, October, if they wanted more sunshine in the actual campground or canyon. This is us leaving Mooney Falls, and we're headed downstream. We were told Beaver Falls is like the next cool thing to look at. So we hiked, I want to say it's 4 miles from Mooney down to Beaver Falls, but on that sheet I had at the beginning definitely shows the distances. We were hitting the fall season, so some of the plant life is a little wilted. The trail's pretty obvious to follow. Lots of people hike it, so it wasn't too bad. But temperatures started to increase throughout the day. We struggled when it got too hot. And there was these bighorn sheep that would kind of hang out near the trail. We were told they were friendly, but you don't want to go up and approach them, obviously, because they're big animals. But they were nearby. Hopefully you guys can see this video. I mean, I'm on the other side of a very small, thin bush, and these guys are big. We saw, I think, 3 on our trip down to Beaver Falls. And everybody told us, you got to go to Beaver Falls, you got to go to Beaver Falls. Some people even recommended going to the confluence where Havasu Creek meets the Colorado River. After doing the hike to Beaver Falls, I would say the confluence really wasn't worth it. Even Beaver Falls wasn't worth it. There were plenty of beautiful spots on the hike where you could have just stopped and played in the creek, played in falls, and totally would have been worth it to just hang out below Mooney Falls somewhere. There were several stream crossings where we had to cross the creek in order to continue to follow the trail downstream. It was nice because we hit this about noon, so the temperatures were warm. We would get wet, and shortly thereafter we'd dry off. Um, we just kind of went for the wet boots approach and just crossed the creek with our shoes on, and our Scott is cooling down. You'll see we don't have much. Like, I'm carrying a backpack with some water and some snacks. So is Megan, and it was just kind of a nice hike downstream. This waterfall didn't have a name, but I would have totally just hiked to this one, which was about a mile downstream of the Mooney waterfall. It's very similar to Beaver Falls. Beaver Falls are bigger, but like I said, if you go to visit here and you're not a strong hiker, maybe skip Beaver Falls and just kind of hang out at some of these smaller ones right below Mooney Falls. And here's Beaver Falls. A lot of people talk it up, saying it's magical and oh, it's amazing. It was a little bigger cascade than some of the other waterfalls we saw on the way down. The trouble was, it was the hangout for everybody that could actually make that hike. So when we got there, there was probably 20 people on this little tiny beach off to the left. There wasn't a lot of space. We figured a bunch of the beach had been eroded away from the last flood. Several people went swimming. There was cliff diving in the area. Um, but this beach over here on the right is really all the space you got at Beaver Falls to hang out at. And I could see it just wasn't enough. So if I were to go again, I would skip Beaver Falls. Give you an idea what the campground looks like. Like I said, 300 people can be in the campground at any given time. I think during this off season, there might have been 150 people there. There wasn't quite the 300 that I expected. For the most part, people were friendly. They traded things like, "Hey, do you need food? I have this. Do you need that?" There were several spots where people left their gear behind, which is highly frowned upon in this canyon because really the only way to get garbage or things out of the canyon is by helicopter, mule, or hiking it out personally. So a lot of people would camp for their 3 days and not use up all their fuel. And then they would leave their fuel canister in kind of a shared area where they were like, "Hey, if you need fuel, I'm just going to leave this here." But then the tribe has to get rid of it after it's empty. So I believe in the leave no trace philosophy where you pack it in, you pack it out, you don't leave any trash behind, and you clean up after yourself and leave it better than you found it. But we did meet a lot of people who left garbage behind. Um, so something to keep in mind. There wasn't any law enforcement. Supposedly there was a campground, like a security guard, but we never saw him. We saw one lady that would clean the bathrooms every day, and she'd drive through on a little four-wheeler. She'd clean each bathroom. There were 4 separate composting toilet bathrooms that each had 3 stalls. That was kind of the only amenity at the campground besides they had filtered spring water that they said you could drink without it being filtered. We still filtered the spring water just in case. About a month before, there was a case of the norovirus that had gone through the campground. I think people were drinking out of the main creek, and people were washing their boxers or their shoes or whatever, up the creek above them, and people got sick. So filter your water, pack your stuff in and out. The campground's just beautiful. No designated spots, so you see a flat place, you want to pitch your tent there, it's totally fine as long as it's not in the trail. So there would be tents on each side of the creek. Some people would just wade over to the other side of the creek and pitch a tent over there. There were several places where the creek had eroded parts of the path. My understanding is they're in the process of rebuilding that just due to the washout. Lots of trees were down. Usually they don't allow campfires, but we got permission to have campfires just because there were so many trees that had washed down, so many branches had broke, and there was a lot of piles of debris. They were okay with small campfires to help burn up some of the brush that was left behind. Here's one of our composting toilets. There was 4 composting toilets in the campground. They use solar power to help break down the waste. There were 3 stalls. You go up the stairs, there's a stall, stall, stall. They were cleaned pretty much daily from what we saw. The hand sanitizer outside wasn't always refilled, but everybody kind of brought their own. Toilet paper was refilled, but we brought our own just because we were like, we're just going to be self-sufficient just in case some of that stuff's not there. Things that got left behind. So Scott here has a can of SpaghettiOs. We found that in the campground. I'm pretty sure he found it next to the path. Somebody had left it behind thinking somebody else might want it. So they had either hiked it in, it had gone by helicopter, or had gone by mule and somehow got here. And then they chose not to hike it out. Well, Scott decided to enjoy the SpaghettiOs, and then he was able to hike that can out of the canyon. So pack it in, pack it out. Don't leave stuff behind. Here's where it was about midnight. We were sleeping soundly, and all of a sudden we started to hear rocks come off the cliff. Rocks started to fall kind of all over the campground. Several people woke up. We put on our headlamps. We started looking around. Is everybody okay? It was pitch black, so I mean, we couldn't see much except for other lights looking around. And we didn't realize until morning that this chunk of limestone had fallen and had just sliced through our friend's tent. And their tent was probably, I don't know, 50 feet away from the base of the cliff. So a rock must have fallen from the top of the cliff, which was 300 feet tall, probably, hit somewhere in the middle and then bounced out and then sliced through their rainfly on the opposite side of the tent. Luckily, the people that had camped at the base of the cliff the night before that I had warned, they didn't get squished. But something to keep in mind, if you do go to this campground, you want to pitch your tent away from the cliff. You want to be safe, look for dangers. They don't have signs that say don't pitch your tent next to the cliff. I mean, it's Darwin there. You got to protect yourself. Here's our group. This is the main waterfall, Havasu Falls. It had seen some damage from the flood. You can see some caution tape there. The tree was eroding away from the water pouring over this thing. When the flood happened, basically this whole cliff face you see in the image had brown chocolate water flowing over the top of it. I mean, it was huge water. Everybody was tucked into cliff faces, had climbed up on things. Some people climbed trees. Something like 6 feet of water raged down through the whole canyon base. So you don't really want to be here during flood season. If it looks like it's going to rain at all during your trip, it might be worth canceling. A lot of people got trip insurance just because the tribe doesn't give you your money back if you cancel. So once you book your reservations for $455 a person for the 3 nights, there's no getting your money back. So you want to definitely have trip insurance. This is just above that waterfall we just saw. The creek would be off to the right in this image, and the waterfall is just over the cliff we're hiking up and around. This is the top of the falls here as we're crossing over this bridge. There was a small fry bread store up here by the bridge that you could go to and get something to eat if you needed to. We saw it open on the first day we were there, and we didn't see it open any other day we were there. So don't count on that for food. There's several waterfalls to check out. There was Mooney Falls, there's Havasu Falls, there's 50-foot falls. I think this one's called Hidden Falls. They make it sound like they're hard to find, but they're all right next to the path. If you follow the creek down, you're going to find every single waterfall, and each one was just gorgeous. They didn't care if you went swimming in them. Some people kind of climbed around on them and played in the water. Just really fantastic. Now, like I said, we're in the shade here, so I could see maybe coming in October would probably be better than the November month that we went, or even end of September, just so you get a little more sunshine in the canyon. A little warmer temperatures too. This is Havasu Falls, the main waterfall. My wife went swimming down in this lower section for 30 seconds or so, and then we got out real quick and dried off. But you can see here, this was probably 11 a.m. and the sun was barely shining in the area. So if you came a month or so before, it'd probably be better. Of course, we got to hike out once we camped for the 3 nights. You got to go through everything you went through. Your packs are a little lighter. We did make sure we had 3 bottles of water each for the hike out, and we ended up using pretty much those 3 bottles. I could see you probably in a hotter month would ration your water better. You would start earlier in the morning. We started hiking out about, I think it was 9 a.m., 8 a.m., and we hit the switchbacks coming out of the main canyon, where you have the big elevation gain up to the parking lot. We hit that about noon, and it was hot. Hot for Alaskans. You're in full sun. It was probably 80, 85 degrees as we hiked out. And I'm not gonna lie, like by the time we got here, like we were felt like dying. All of us had a limp. We had drank all our water. We were heading for the parking lot. And then we totally forgot that Scott had to park about a mile away down the road. So we actually had almost an extra mile to hike once we got up to the parking lot. But here we are coming up the zigzags, lighter packs, but still just as bad. Here you can see the zigzags, and the upper trail is here where my pointer is. And we got to get all the way up here to where these buildings are. These are a couple of bathrooms and where the kind of the start of the mule stuff is in the parking lot. So it's a nice hike up. All these rocks in the zigzags are loose. They're big boulders, like roll your ankle kind of stuff. The trails are not packed down due to all the washouts that happened during the rainy season. So it was definitely a struggle each way. I can see why a lot of people fly in and out, or they have their bag shipped in by the mules. It makes the hike a little more enjoyable. But they really made it so anybody could go on this adventure, because you could fly in and out with the helicopter. You could have your gear brought in by the mules, and then you'd only have to hike 2 miles from the village site to the waterfalls to enjoy the waterfalls. And the 2-mile hike to the waterfalls is pretty much mostly flat on a hard dirt road. So something to think about if you're not a strong hiker. Book the helicopter, book the mules, don't carry your gear in. And just about anybody could go here, whether or not you're a strong hiker. We saw some people in their 70s and 80s that were there, and they didn't carry their gear in. They flew in the helicopter. They stayed at a lodge in the village, which is rather expensive. Basically, for the 3 nights, I think it's $2,500 for one room. And you can share the room with up to 4 people, so it's like 600 per person. Plus, you still pay the 455, so you end up paying like $1,000 a person if you wanted to do that and do it totally cush and easy. The reason why I wanted to do this talk right before the end of the month is that the reservations open here on February 1st. It's kind of like a lottery system where you log on at midnight or noon. I don't know when the actual time is when they release the dates, but you create an account, they release the dates, and then you click the dates you want, and then you get confirmation that you got those dates a couple weeks later. So by doing this talk here end of January, it gives you a couple of days to do your research if this is something you'd want to do. And February 1st, they start releasing the dates to grab up for the 2025 season. And that's kind of my talk on exploring Havasu. If you guys have questions, I can switch over to where I can see the chat box. I think. I'll go back to viewing. There we go. Okay, nothing in the chat box. Did anybody have any questions about the trip or things to pack or things we might have seen along the way?
This mouse, is it? Hi, this is Cindy asking this question. So how soon when did you make your reservation for November?
So when we booked it after the release of all the dates. So the quote good dates were taken, which apparently the good dates are midsummer. I can't imagine going midsummer because of the triple digit temperatures. So when we looked, there were dates available in October, there were dates available in November, and then December and January they're closed. So when we logged on, there were some dates available in November. We grabbed some of the first 3 that we saw and just clicked it, and poof, we had it. It wasn't complicated. We didn't have to bid for anything. I'm assuming shortly after the February date, you could book something in September, October pretty easy, because it looks like the dates people grab up are kind of the holidays, and then midsummer months for some reason. But those people have to be flying in or taking the mule, or I cannot imagine that hike in triple digit numbers. Anybody else?
There's some people on the chat who have questions. Can you see that,
Oh,
Brian?
I can. Yep. All right. Let me go to the first one. What kind of water shoes do you recommend? I pretty much wore a worn out pair of sneakers for the water shoes. We did see a lot of people having water shoes that you order from Temu or Amazon that have rubber soles on them and they're mesh and they drain really fast. But I found an old pair of tennis shoes. They dried overnight, especially if you were in a warmer month, they would dry overnight pretty much instantly. But even in November, they were dry come morning. And I found it was better to be comfortable in your shoes, being able to step on kind of rocks and pokey things, where a thin pair of water shoes, you would feel those things and maybe roll your ankle. So I'd honestly recommend just bringing a pair of hiking boots or something you're going to hike in, and then a pair of water shoes or camp shoes that you wear around camp. Your feet are going to dry really fast there. There's no moisture in the air. Everything gets sucked out of you. Wanted to visit for a long time. I came in late. What year did I hike this? I hiked this last year. It was this last November. It was right after a major flood, so we actually thought our reservations were going to be canceled, but none of the bridges were washed out, so they were like, go ahead, everything's open, everything's good to go. We did find the trail a little rougher than most people described it, just due to the washout. Do you think this is so much more scenic and interesting than hiking into the canyon from the national park? Did it seem noisy with the helicopters? On the hike out, we heard the helicopters, but when you were in the campground, the stream is loud enough with white noise that we never heard the helicopters, except for there was one low flyby, but I think they were looking for somebody like search and rescue type thing. So most of the time we didn't hear the helicopters at all. We only heard them during the hike in and out. But daily wise, we didn't really hear the helicopters. I think it was super interesting. You didn't see a whole lot of people on our hike in. We maybe passed a half dozen people, same on the hike out. Being that they only allow 300 people per day in the canyon, you're kind of on your own. I mean, you can make friends with people at the campground that you might see, but the majority of the people in the campground stayed in the campground. So if you have any hiking ability whatsoever and actually can climb down that ladder at Mooney Falls, you could hike out to the confluence where Havasu Creek meets the Colorado River and you might see 3 other people there on your hike out. I think we saw 12 or something. But for the most part, you're not gonna see anybody. Yo, so the prices, yeah, let me do a shared screen on Havasu reservations here. So, on their website, let me go back to shared screen. We're gonna go to the Havasu reservations page. You guys can see that now, I hope. Somebody please tell me yes. So campground reservations are $455 per person per night. So if you have 2 people, you're gonna pay $1,000. It seemed like a lot, but knowing that there's only 300 other people in the canyon, knowing that it was kind of private, you could kind of do what you wanted. There wasn't a lot of people, around you being jerks. Anybody that's paying this price is wants to enjoy their own time. So you didn't have loud music playing. People weren't being jerks. For the most part, everything was pretty calm. You just kind of did your own thing. The $455 per person gets you 3 nights. You don't have to stay the 3 nights. So some people would, excuse me, some people would only stay 2 nights. You still pay the $455 per person, but you can stay a maximum of 3 nights, and you have to be hiking out by your 4th day. Now you can see the lodge reservations are $2,277 per lodge room, up to 4 people for 3 nights. I'm not quite sure if you also pay the $455 per person for the campground, but I'm pretty sure you just pay that $2,277 and you get 4 people for that price. You'd have to call them and verify that. We didn't stay in the lodge. My understanding is the lodge is like a Motel 6. You might have a microwave and a coffee pot in your room, but that's kind of the extent of your amenities. Single room kind of thing, just, 12 by 12, 20 by 20 room, whatever. Pretty small from what we understood. Reservations are non-refundable, non-cancelable. That's pretty important. You want to get insurance. If for some reason you break your leg a month before your trip and you can't go, the tribe will not give you your money back. They don't care that you broke your leg. They will note that it's non-refundable and you better have insurance. We didn't have insurance. Luckily, nothing went bad with our trip. But I chose not to get insurance because I was like, we're going to take it easy a month before. Everything's going to be fine. And then the flood happened about a month before our trip. And I was like, oh, we should have got the insurance. But luckily, a couple weeks before our trip, we received an email that everything was open and everything was good to go. But even because of the flood, reservations were canceled. They don't give you your money back. They were willing to give you dates for the next year, but they may not be the dates you wanted. So there was some rules as far as that goes. Let me switch back to where I was at so I can see the chat. So prices are high, I'm not gonna lie. It does sound a little spendy. So as a photographer, I really liked the slot canyon. There were plenty of things to see. The shadows were right. If you were into black and white photography, I could totally see spending some time in the slot canyon as you hiked in. Some photographers would stay up all night at the waterfalls and light paint the waterfalls and take pictures of the stars. And the moon was out several nights where we had some pink sunsets. And you'd see a lot of professional photographers at different waterfalls or different spots in the canyon taking pictures. And people were pretty respectful of that kind of thing. People weren't walking in front of the cameras, or they'd ask, hey, am I in your way? And most photographers were like, hey, go ahead, do whatever, I'm working around you, not the other way around. That's kind of it. Anything else?
Thank you, Brian. That was great. We appreciate you sharing your adventures with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. I know most of my stuff is usually in Alaska, but this seemed to be something I was interested in. It's a big thing on Instagram if you're into Instagram photos, a lot of the blue waterfalls. If you were to Google blue waterfall, most of them are from the Havasu area. So it's pretty popular on social media. My thought was I want to go see it before it gets too popular on social media. My understanding is back in the day, anybody could hike into the canyon for free. And then for a long time, it was $100 per person for 3 nights. And just recently, they bumped it up to $455 a person. So I could definitely see another price hike in the near future. So if it's something you're interested in, the dates become available February 1st. You got to create an account. You got to have a credit card on file with the tribe. But you got a few days to look into it. And it definitely made a nice trip to get away from Southeast Alaska during the winter season.
Well,
Cool.
thank you, Brian. The pictures were fabulous, and we really appreciate all the detail that you give us. So it makes it easy for someone to follow and go themselves. So thank you.
You're welcome.